organizational communication part 2, we will be discussing about the barriers of communication. In the previous lecture, we discussed about the noise or the barriers in communication. To understand what are the sources of barriers and how does miscommunication happen, how barriers can lead to miscommunication, we will be learning in more details the genesis of miscommunication. The feeling that we have communicated enough gives a sense of is one of the factors of miscommunication. A negative work environment, if there is a negative work environment, that can also create miscommunication. As we know that workplace today is there are various factors of power and politics in the workplace which create a sense of or negativity and or which will lead to say which will be one of the barriers of communication. Negative feelings towards other, pessimistic attitude towards others, the receiver, source. So, these factors create a negativity in the workplace and which can lead to miscommunication. Choosing the wrong communication channel, perception barriers, lack of ownership and trust, interpersonal trust within the sender and the receiver, and cross cultural issues. To understand it in more details, we will discuss about the communication barriers like sender related barriers, verbal and non-verbal barriers, cross cultural barriers, and the physical and other barriers. So, these barriers are organizational barriers, semantic, socio-psychological barriers, physical, personal and organizational barriers. What is semantic barrier? As we discussed here, the semantic barrier is one of the organizational barriers. So, what is semantic barrier? Vocabulary, dialects, accent, jargon, euphemism or praise, the slangs that we use, abstractness in the abstract words, ambiguous words and wrong translation. These factors create semantic barriers. Vocabulary, right vocabulary should be used in each context. If there is a wrong vocabulary or erroneous words are used which may also spoil the relationship or which may lead to miscommunication. Dialects, there are several dialects and what is an appropriate language to use in a particular context. Accent, like say African speaks in a different accent, in India itself there are different people with a different accent. So, so accent also can be the reason for miscommunication. Jargon or say some words like euphemism or praise, slangs which are used in a place. So, these can also distort the message. Abstract words say for example, if we use some words which are fuzzy in nature which can also lead to miscommunication. Ambiguous words. There are second factors like the socio-psychological barriers, perception differences which results from differences in culture, age group, learning styles of individuals, socio-economic status and experience of individuals. Attitudinal differences between the sender and the receiver, conflicting signals, dissonance between verbal and non-verbal signals. Perception difference, each culture people are conditioned to think or to take decisions based on the origin based on their cultural belongingness. Age group, different age group people from different age group or generational cohorts have a different way of articulation, different way of thinking, their cognition differs. Learning style of each individual is different, socio-economic status and also influences the thought process of an individual, their experience. People having less experience and more experience will also that influences in their way of communication. Attitudinal differences, personal barriers, emotional conflict, poor listening, poor retention, premature evaluation. Emotional conflict, we know that every individual is influenced by their emotions, guided by emotions. If you are in a happy mood or if you are in a sad mood, that will influence the way you communicate, put forth the message. Poor listening, generally communication will be effective when we speak language which is required in the to make frame the message. When we also need to get a right feedback, it also depends on the observational skills and listening skills of an individual. Retention, memory recall, recallability of an individual also influences the individual's communication style. So, poor retention, poor listening and premature evaluation of the audience or about the message can be personal barriers or person specific barriers. The next point is physical barriers. What are the barriers? Like sometimes the message is distorted by the environment, the factors in the environment like mechanical factors, sound related barriers, noise due to light, bad handwriting, color, the traffic, the odor of the room, odor or room temperature. So, these factors also interfere in the communication process, be it the one to one communication, one to many communication in a team or when you are communicating in a conference, in a town hall meeting. So, the lighting, bad weather, bad handwriting, traffic, odor, room temperature, all of these factors also influence in the or they form barriers in communication process. What is the fault in the equipment, the mic which you are using for speaking, addressing the audience, if that has some problem, the noise, then that would also form the barrier, physical barrier of communication. Time factor, time is also an important physical factor for communication, miscommunication. Organizational barriers, what are the organizational barriers? Status difference in individuals. There are, as we know, that communication between managers and the supervisors and the workers, there is a difference in status. The status difference is due to the position power they enjoy between the sender and the receiver of information. Hierarchical transmission. So, hierarchy, they have different hierarchical positions and based on the positions they occupy, they would be speaking in a different tone, there would be the message would be conveyed with a different flair. Group size, what is the size of the group, that also forms the barriers in communication. How effectively you convey the message in a smaller group constituting of 5 to 7 members and in a larger group with 15 to 20 members, it differs based on the size of the group. Special constraints, the distance between the sender and the receiver, it matters. If the space is less, the conversation is in a different, is carried forward in a different manner. If there is a space is too much or there is a wider space, it will have a different connotation. Organizational structure, as we know that there are different types of structures in the organization, a tall structure and a flatter structure. Tall structure with more number of or larger number of hierarchical levels and a wider structure which is considered to be a flexible structure which has a different type of message or which has a different type of communication process which is guided by the structure of the organization. Rules and regulations. Every organization has certain rules and regulations as part of the formal structure. So, rules and regulations also help sometimes form barriers, they are organizational barriers in communication process. Roles and status, rules and regulations, structure, size of the group, hierarchical transmission, all these are factors which constitute the organizational barriers. Sender related barriers, the challenges faced by the sender. When idea is not very clear, then there would be difficulty in sending the message. When the medium through which the message is sent is not an appropriate one, the presence of barriers, these factors are primary challenges which are faced by sender of a message. Receiver related barriers, what are the primary challenges? Messages ignored or missed due to information clutter. A large amount of information or information overload can distort the effectiveness of the message, because a receiver or audience is exposed to a huge amount of information and is not able to clarify or is not able to clear or to differentiate which is most important and which is least to be ignored. Messages, meaning of the message is not interpreted in the way they are meant. So, if the audience is not able to interpret the meaning, is not able to cognitively retrieve the meaning or able to hear or understand the meaning. So, that can also form the barrier in the communication process. A low impact message, the message which has not either been worded properly, which has semantic barriers, which is not written in a very simple manner, may also create which will not have an impact on the receiver. So, these are primary challenges by the receiver of the message. Intrapersonal and interpersonal barriers. What is intrapersonal factor? What is interpersonal factor? Intrapersonal factors are related to self of an individual, like or otherwise we are also we have discussed the self related or person specific barriers, selective perception, individual differences in communication skills, emotions, frame of reference or the state of mind of an individual, whether the person is in a happy mood, in anger, the person is in a say sad mood. All these factors also they interfere in the communication process. Emotions, state of mind, attitude, preconceived ideas or preconceived notion about a particular person or a message. Interpersonal factors, when the factors are related to two individuals in communication process, the factors like climate of trust, then credibility of the source, sender receiver similarity, and intrapersonal sensitivity, selective listening and semantic problems, they form the barriers in interpersonal domain. Climate, the organizational climate, whether it is a kind of participative culture, the organizational climate is the hierarchical structure, or it is flexible, it defines what would be the communication style. Trust, how much we trust each other in an organization, that also decides or that also helps in effective or ineffective, that can decide the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of communication. Credibility of the source, how much authentic the source is, so that we can understand or interpret the message. We can rely the information given by the person. Sender receiver similarity, when sender and receiver have similarity either due to the culture, due to some of the certain factors like their common interest or their position. So, there would be the similarity in the sender and receiver in their thought process. So, the message would be most effective. If there is a disparity, then there are chances of getting or there are chances of having barriers in communication, and the message would be ineffective, or this would lead to miscommunication. Interpersonal sensitivity, how much one person understands the other person, will also decide the communication process. Selective listening, generally we must have seen that people have sometimes they selectively try to understand or listen to a particular message which they have interest in, and which is also a barrier to communication. Semantic barrier, the use of language, slangs, the jargons, they are also part of interpersonal barriers of communication. Intrapersonal barriers, communication apprehension, undue tension and anxiety about oral communication, written communication, or both. Gender differences, men tend to talk to emphasize status, while women talk to create connections. So, men give more importance to the status or the task, and women give more. These are some gender differences in communication which also form interpersonal barriers. Gender communication difference, men report talk and women rapport talk. Men give emphasis on advice quickly and directly, women give advice indirectly and reluctantly. Men, they give emphasis on conversations and are negotiations of status, and conversations are bonding events for women, less sensitive to nonverbal cues in case of men, and women are more sensitive to nonverbal cues. Intrapersonal barriers, in more details we can understand. Selective perception, people selectively interpret what they see on the basis of their interest, background, experience and attitude. Language, words have different meaning to different people. like jargon and ambiguity, emotions, how a receiver feels at the time a message is received will influence how the message is interpreted. Attitude, which is the predisposition to act or not to act in a certain way. Information overload or information clutter, a condition in which information inflow exceeds an individual's processing capacity. Filtering, a sender's manipulation of information so that it will be seen more favorably by the receiver. So, information overload, episodes of information overload and the employee's information processing capacity. Cross cultural barriers, verbal differences, language differences, non-verbal differences are voice intonation, interpersonal interpreting non-verbal meanings, importance of verbal versus non-verbal, silence and conversational overlaps. We have already discussed about different types of communication barriers. Now, the question comes how we can overcome the communication barriers so that the message is meaningfully conveyed to the receiver. And so, here we will be discussing about overcoming communication barriers, what is the individual skill required and what is the organizational action required. In individual skills, the important skills are active listening, asking questions, showing interest and occasionally paraphrasing to ensure accurate interpretation. More effective listening and what is, we will then compare what is effective listening and what is less effective listening. Stay active and focused, whereas pay attention to what is being said, ask questions repeatedly. If you do not understand, you have to ask question. Keep an open mind to the message which has been sent and assimilate information, assimilate or collate information so that you can understand the holistic picture of the message being conveyed. And what is less effective listening is passive and laid back attitude, is easily distracted. It distracts when the message is not given or when you do not pay much attention. So, you get distracted from the message when you ask no questions, when you do not have any questions to raise. So, that will also lead to miscommunication, and when you have a preconceived notion about the message, that will also distract the listener, and when you have disregard for the information which is conveyed. So, we have to overcome these barriers in order to make it more effective. How do we overcome these what skills are required, individual skills for improving the communication? Select the appropriate channel. Complicated messages should be sent through a rich channel such as face to face discussion or telephone. Understand each other's perspective. Management by wandering around. Managers must be willing to get out of the office and check communication with others. Organizational, what are the organizational actions? How can an organization take initiative to make communication better? Create a culture of trust and openness. Subordinates feel free to transmit information or negatives as well as positive messages without any fear. So, there should not be any fear when the message is conveyed. So, a climate of trust and openness will help in overcoming the barriers. Use formal information channels like direct email, bulletin boards and employee surveys. Ensure or encourage the use of multiple channels including both formal and informal communication. Structure and communication needs fit. The system of organizational feedback and learning will help overcome problems of poor coordination. How do we overcome communication barriers? So, individual factors and how to overcome that. Individual factors, interpersonal dynamics, channels and media, semantic barriers, inconsistent clues. So, active listening is one way to overcome the barriers, selection of appropriate channels that we discussed and knowledge of the other individual or others perspective. Organizational factors, status and power differences, departmental needs and goals, lack of formal channels and communication networks unsuited to task and poor coordination. How do we overcome these barriers? Climate of trust, dialogue, two-way communication, development and use of formal channels, encouragement of multiple channels, formal and informal channels, changing organizations or group structures to fit communication needs, and feedback and active listening, and feedback and learning. So, overall what we discussed here is, we discussed about the communication barriers, we are also discussing about the individual actions and organizational actions to overcome the communication barriers. So, reducing barriers to improve organizational effectiveness, flat organizational structures, improved relationships. We will in later sections we will be discussing, in the next lecture we will be discussing about Zohari window, transaction analysis. These are the two important theories which will help us to overcome the communication barriers in the workplace. Training is required, listening skills, writing skills, speaking, memory retention, concentration, feedback, which will help in promoting the effective communication, promote two-way communication. Generally, one-way communication can always spoil or can distort message or can transfer of message. So, two-way communication should be given emphasis. Dynamism, adapt and adopt or based on the situation. Timely information, correct information, clear and concise messages, these are the basics of communication process. With this, I would like to conclude this session. We discussed about the communication barriers, various personal barriers, semantic barriers and perceptual barriers. We discussed about the organizational specific barriers and the methods of overcoming the barriers, so that the message can be effectively conveyed in the communication. As we have already understood that communication can make or break relationship. Communication can bridge an effective workplace or can develop an effective workplace. Thank you.